This first question comes in for Kevin. Now, Kevin, when it comes to the various forms of identity threat at account opening, should we be thinking about a single machine learning model to detect all threats, or perhaps individual specialized models for each particular threat presented?
So, yeah, good question, Annie. And I think it's going to vary by organization and really how much variance they see and how they're being attacked. When we work with very large financial institutions, we tend to see they get high volumes of both, for example, synthetic fraud and third-party fraud. That those patterns can look really, really different. I think in theory, we love the one model to catch them all, but that very often the behavior profiles of these methodologies, these ways of committing identity fraud, are so different that when we try and build a model that catches both, you kind of get the model that catches neither, right? Or really just gives you kind of a C instead of that A grade level evaluation. So at least from our perspective, if you're getting meaningful amounts, and I think both Clyde and Wayne hit on this notion of often you need meaningful amounts of bad things to happen to have the right amount of tags to build these solutions. If you are getting hit with both, different models that specialize in finding each behavior is probably the way to go. It creates some operational complexity, but ultimately builds a better strategy.
Yeah. Hey, and Kevin, this is Joe. If I just add on to that really quickly, I mean, we think about it just like a credit waterfall, right? So you've got a series of models. Typically, ours will start with the velocity models to run first, and then if the application, passes through the velocity models, then we have we'll have a sort of a waterfall of additional fraud models that will run, whether for the ID risk and then for the device risk, et cetera. And then decide what kind of remediation would happen after that. So I think Kevin's right. You want to build one model isn't going to catch it all, and you need a variety of models. And then if you use a waterfall approach, you can use them so they sort of fire at the right time.
Yeah, Joe, completely agree, right? I mean, that gets to the whole play of efficiency, right? If you start building your fraud strategy the way you built your credit strategy from a waterfall perspective, you're 100% in the right direction. That sounds perfect.
A quick question that's dropped in for Joe. Now, would Joe perhaps be able to describe the streaming infrastructure Innova is using for their Velocity feature engine?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So we are, when we first built out our streaming feature, because we're not doing, again, I mentioned we're doing near real time here. So we're doing like 15-minute updates where we're streaming that data. So it's not like true, real time streaming. So we've been able to do that initially with our standard sort of Postgres database infrastructure as well. We are now as we're rolling this out across all of our brands in all our countries. We're doing it currently in the U.S. We are now converting that to more of a cloud. We're using AWS, and we're looking at some of the pure streaming tools like Kafka and a few other ones that will make that much more efficient. But we've been able to to be honest, we've been able to sort of brute force it for now and get it to on a 15-minute streaming schedule. So our velocity models are at least using, near real-time data for these things.
Final question that we've got here. Clyde, this is directed for yourself. You mentioned earlier in your presentation some important considerations when looking at important ML considerations. What would your number one consideration be? And are there any considerations that are perhaps overlooked that perhaps need more attention being paid to them?
I think the biggest one is really getting that clean data, because at the end of the day, if you realize that you've been feeding some partial data into your models, you potentially run the risk of having to really reset the whole risk model, the build that you had, and start from scratch feeding the data. I think the bigger considerations that I see outside of that is, as we and many of us adopt machine learning platforms on fraud, where does the next step, where does that go? And I think all of us have had the challenges, it touched on it with the KBA and some of the avenues we have from a call center, and even in the branch. The identity documents are equally easy to counterfeit these days too as well, but looking at what options you can put in there, because I think that's where synthetic fraud is really, as we mentioned, the big impetus right now, and I think the machine learning will get us in front of that eventually a little bit more. But on the other hand, that call center is going to continue to be where they're going to have to drive to, because they aren't going to go away hungry. The criminals will continue and find the weakest link.